I want to say again how much I appreciate you letting me use your library. I told Corey for about the 1000th time.
Once again, it's no problem,
Corey assured me.
You're honestly doing me a favor. I'd worried about leaving Dad by himself while Victoria and I returned to hell to give birth to our child.
The Von Trask library was massive. It was like the Beauty and the Beast library, if it was set in the Nightmare Before Christmas. The whole place had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves made of dark wood that seemed to move if you looked at it for too long. There were red swags and gothic tapestries everywhere, and all the lights had this red hue to them, which Corey assured me was better for long hours of reading. Here was kept the history of the family, as well as the knowledge that they had collected over centuries of life. If I couldn't find what I needed here, then I wasn't sure where I needed to look. I'd been thinking a lot about the matter of my blood, especially after my uncle had left. It was a little like finding out that there was a branch in your family tree and trying to discover more about that side of yourself than you ever knew. I was curious to know how something like this could happen, and when I asked Corey about it, he had suggested a trip to his family library. Now, Dad had to lead the offer of house sitting for him while he was away, and his house wasn't too far from the mortuary, so I could easily secure the house and then come back in the evenings to do some research. I had worried that Malcolm's care would be extensive, but it turned out that he mostly needed care in the evenings and early mornings.
You just plug his new blood bag in and throw the old one out. I like to talk to him a little each day, so he knows that someone's here. He mostly does, well, this, he said, pointing at the prone figure. I told him that was no problem, and I could definitely handle that and talk to him a little in the evenings before I even delve into my research. So,
he said as he pointed to the first of the shelves.
This one's family history. The one next to it is vampire lore and accounts of famous vampires. The other two shelves are, well, mostly romance novels with a scattering of gothic fiction. The second shelf is likely to be your best source of information, but the first shelf might provide some information too. I laid out a few volumes that might interest you.
He pointed to a stack of books on the spindly table by the door, and I could see that he had left a smaller tower of books for me.
Are you ready to go?
Came a voice from around the corner, and I saw Victoria waddling in through the doorway, holding a duffel bag over her shoulder.
V,
Corey said, and my clothes rustled as he did that quick vampire run of his to be at her side.
Let me get that for you. You shouldn't be lifting too much. The doctor says...
Victoria made a rude noise and grabbed the bag back.
Corey, I'm a half-demon. I have enough strength to rip a man's heart from his chest without breaking a sweat. I think I can manage the duffel bag.
Corey looked like he wanted to argue, but he bit his tongue. As Corey made his way back to me...
So, as I was saying...
He'd explained that he would be in the underworld with V for about a week, 2 at the most, just until she was settled. After that, he'd return. He wanted to stay the entire time, not only to support her, but also to witness the birth of their child. But V had pushed back. For her, the birth of a succubus child was a sacred ritual, meant to be done alone. It ensured the spiritual bond between a mother and offspring remained unbroken. Their child, however, was something entirely new. A hybrid of a succubus and a vampire, something that had never even existed before. Because of that, she was determined to follow tradition exactly as it had always been, fearing that any deviation could have unforeseen consequences. She reassured him that she wouldn't be alone. Others would be there to assist if anything went wrong. But as much as Corey wanted to be by her side, this was something that he couldn't be a part of.
When you leave for work, just make sure that Dad's locked in and arm the alarm system. If you need anything, give us a call, okay?
I nodded, but an odd thought suddenly occurred to me. Wait, does hell even get reception? How are you two even going to keep up communication? And Victoria laughed and explained to me that, of course there's a reception in hell. How else do I think careers were made? And I laughed as well, wishing them luck as they stepped out onto the lawn, and they said that they would see me in a week or so. I was more experienced with these kinds of things than most, but still. I don't know what I was expecting or how I expected them to get to hell. In my mind, I guess I thought that a portal would open, some words would be spoken, and they would just vanish. Maybe even a weird stairwell would appear and they would descend into the earth. What I wasn't expecting was a very normal-looking cab with the words, Brimstone Taxi Service, written across it. Corey helped her in, and they waved goodbye. And then just drove away. Very normally. I headed inside, and after finding nothing in the kitchen but wine and bags of blood, I don't know what I was expecting, honestly. I grabbed the top book from the stack and went upstairs to study it. I decided to sit with Malcolm as I worked, reading aloud to him in hopes that it would help me retain some of the information. I made notes, but I ended up reading the same passages again and again as my yawns became more pronounced. It was only 9. It was too early to be this tired. But the subject matter was a little dry. I wish you were here to help me make sense of this, Malcolm, I told him as I flipped through the old leather tome. You could really use your perspective here. The book had some of those sticky note tags in various places, but I didn't seem to have found anything that would help me with my search. There were some stories about people getting blood from vampires and some about children born to vampires, but I didn't think any of it had to do with my current situation. It was weird. Some of it might explain my condition, but I knew both my parents. I looked like my father, but I had always had my mother's eyes and as well as her earlobes. My condition could only really be explained if I was a child of 2 venereal bloodsuckers, but again, that couldn't have happened. I sighed as I put the book down and I went to the library for another. It was shaking up to be a long night at this rate. Let's see here. The bloodlines of the Marsha house and the Cartanine line was said to have produced many strong heirs. Their lines formed the house of Fornti, Gabrisi, and I squinted at the name before making a pass at it. Hassophelian?
Hassophelian?
The book fell out of my lap as the raspy voice crept across my senses. I looked around, expecting to see some corpsey vamp who had come to visit, but Malcolm and I were the only ones in his bedroom. And then I looked at Malcolm, trying to see if maybe I had sat on my phone and pocket-dialed someone. But while his eyes were closed, his mouth hung slightly open. Mr. Von Trask? I asked, laughing a little as I felt foolish. He had been out for months. What were the chances that he would come out of it now?
It's pronounced Hassophelian,
Malcolm intoned, his eyes coming open slowly as he turned his head to look at me.
I swear, my dear Mortician, listening to you stumble over simple pronunciations is enough to wake the dead.
His hand fumbled weakly at his side of his bed, and I jumped again as the little motor engaged and he sat up slowly.
Temperapedic,
he rasped, reaching out to take a hold of the blood bag that had been keeping him alive and detached it as if it was nothing but a ripe apple.
Worth every penny. How long?
How long? I asked, not understanding.
Have I been unconscious?
Malcolm asked, rolling his eyes as he sipped at the blood.
I swear, Mortician, you get a lobotomy while I was asleep.
I shook my head, my surprise beginning to ebb. About 8 months? Corey's been running your business while you've been out. And he swallowed. Yuck. And sighed.
Ugh. To the detriment of my holdings, I'm sure.
Actually, he's been doing pretty well. He's expanded the business, and he and Victoria have been... Some of the blood oozed from the corner of his mouth as he nearly spit it out onto his rich bedspread.
He has a woman running my business,
he asked, turning to look at me very slowly. Well, I mean, they have been quite the power couple lately. I'm not sure things would be where they are today without her help. And he rolled his eyes.
I had hoped he had better sense. Where is Cornelius anyway? Don't tell me he left me in your care. Don't you have a mortuary to run?
As it happens, I do. But Corey and Victoria have gone to the underworld so that way he can get her set up, so that way she can deliver their child, Grandpa Von Trask. And Malcolm was rendered speechless for a moment, and with that, I took my opportunity. So, when were you going to tell me that I had vampire in my blood? I hadn't thought that his surprise could get any bigger, but it did. He gagged and I saw some of the blood spatter onto the bedspread as he choked a little.
What?
Vampire blood. And not just any vampire blood. Blood from a pure lineage, I said, drawing the words out. It's why my blood is so potent for your customers. Isn't it? His face circled through a half dozen different feelings at once, and I could see him contemplating a lie, but the game was clearly up. He thought about half-truths and semi-lies, and finally, he must have landed on the truth. The game was over, and now we needed to share information, especially if he intended to get any more of my blood.
Who told you?
That's a bit of a story. Malcolm shrugged.
I'd say I've slept long enough.
And so with that, I told him about how Corey had been branching out and how he had expanded into other avenues. I told them about how Victoria had become pregnant and that they were engaged, how they had been living here and taking care of him, and how we had run afoul of the local marshal, and that my blood had killed someone. Malcolm didn't seem so surprised as I told him who the vampire had been that had died. And that didn't surprise me much either.
I had always meant to tell Cornelius that this might be a problem. It always seemed like there would be more time. Yes, I know that your blood could kill vampires if they overindulged. It happened once, a long time ago. Your grandfather's blood was potent too, and there was a noble who was quite fond of it. Your grandfather had found himself in some substantial debt, and I offered him a trade. I would pay the debt, and he would give me 3 bags of blood. He made the trade, though it left him very weak. I went to see a man about some blood. Lord Grabesius was an old friend, someone I had known for centuries, but he was also a glutton. He bought the 3 bags, and I watched him suck them dry in a matter of minutes. It was nauseating. I've never liked drinking from those little bags. It makes the blood taste terrible. Well, it was down to half of the 3rd bag when he suddenly got the strangest look on his face. It was somewhere between the need to vomit and the need to break wind, but instead, he fell onto the floor and began to shake. I watched. I wasn't sure what was happening to him, and when he stopped shaking, I thought he might have had a gas bubble or something. Turns out, he was dead. Well, deader. It wasn't hard to put it together, but I figured I owed it to your grandfather to get the rest of the story.
And I snorted. Not hard to put it together. How is it not that hard to put together? And Malcolm shrugged.
I became a vampire in 1060. I'd learned a good many things in that time and seen a good many things as well. You don't live that long without figuring out what blood poisoning looks like. I assumed he had tried to double-cross me. There are things you can eat to poison our kind, and so I returned to Ohio and went to ask him why he had done such a thing, or thought it a good idea.
He smacked his lips suddenly and looked down at the empty bag.
This is a long story, Mortician. I might need another snack if we're going to continue.
I sighed. 1 or 2. He pretended not to think about it.
Better make it 2. It is such a long story. Perhaps you could grab my scotch from the liquor cabinet as well. Bag blood always tastes a little better with scotch in it. Cuts the mealy taste.
I headed downstairs and grabbed a few more bags from the fridge. The scotch was a little bit harder to get to. The cabinet was ornate, and I was a little too afraid to open it too hard and break everything. The whole thing looked like it would burst into a million pieces if I was too rough, and it tinkled loudly when I popped the door. The scotch was J&B, cheap stuff, and I couldn't believe that Malcolm wouldn't even splurge on Johnny Walker. I carried them all upstairs, and Malcolm practically squealed as he saw the bottle of scotch.
Superb,
he said, ripping the plug out of the blood and drinking off a little before adding a generous dollop of liquor to the bag. He swirled it a little, took another sip, and practically shivered.
Sweet dark lord, I have missed liqueur. Blood alcohol level is just a word to you, but to me, it's a way of life. You've never fed from a drunk. The after effects are...
Geez, Grandpa. I was promised a story, not a lecture on bad decisions. And Malcolm snorted.
I never realized that sarcasm could be generational. Very well, very well. Where were we? Ah, yes, so I returned to your grandfather's house, the same one you live in now, actually, ready to end your line if I didn't get some answers pretty damn quick. Your grandmother was out playing bridge, and your grandfather was working late in his study. He looked up when I came in, smiling until he saw my face. I told him he had one chance, only one chance, to explain why my good friend had died after taking in his blood. He looked confused, saying he had never seen such a thing happen before, and then asked what could have brought something like that on. I'd been taking his blood in exchange for services for about 10 years, and this question made me think about why this had suddenly become an issue. Plenty of people had indulged in his blood. The blood was good, and I had a lot of clients who were interested in it.
Any idea why that might be? I asked, genuinely interested.
Well, it's an old bloodline for starters, and it's one that's always been connected to our world. Do you know that you can trace your bloodline back across 13 generations of morticians? I suspect that even before this line, your ancestors worked with the dead in some capacity. It's rare to find such a connection, but it's more than that. You're drawn to this life by something deeper, something almost primal. Anyway, though, back to our story. I took a seat and asked him if something had changed recently. He told me that the only change was the payment that he had received a few months ago. Payment from a vampire.
The word vampire had been broken by a yawn, and I could tell that Malcolm was getting tired. He had been in a coma for quite a while, and I suppose that it would take him some time to regain his full strength. He was most of the way through his first bag, and he was looking at the second bag owlishly as he tried to keep his eyes open. What sort of payment? I asked, leaning closer.
Oh, right, well, the vampire had wanted a funeral for his mate, and she had died in a house fire, and he had lost everything he owned in that fire as well. Oh, man, your grandfather, something beyond money, if he would help him lay her to rest, and your grandfather had agreed.
The bag of blood made a heavy sloshing as it hit the ground, and I pulled it as it splattered everywhere. The sound brought Malcolm back around, and he shook his head as he reached for the towel on his nightstand. I took it from him and cleaned up the blood, Malcolm yawning again as he closed his eyes slowly.
Apologies, Mortician. It appears I have overdone it. I wrote down the account, however, and added it to my personal library. It's on the third shelf, seventh from the left.
He was already starting to lose consciousness.
About halfway through.
As he started to snore, I left him to his slumber. I was too excited to sleep. I now had some of the answers that I was looking for. I went to the library, and after some counting, I found the one that he was talking about. It was a history of accounts by mortals, and after some thumbing and flipping, I found what I was looking for. The entry for a one Matthew Garvey, person that I only knew by reputation and could barely remember, and how he had accepted a form of payment I was unfamiliar with. June 10th, 1958. Today I was called upon by a gentleman by the name of Melorius Graffin. His wife, Carmela, had perished in a terrible fire, and he sought my services to secure a proper burial. Nothing extravagant, only a modest plot, a headstone, and a quiet ceremony. He wished to be the sole mourner, and he requested that the service be held after regular business hours. He informed me that he had no money, and his voice was heavy with sorrow. He expressed that he also had nothing of value to offer, but he could not rest knowing that his wife lay unburied, her soul unmourned. He explained that if I were to help him, he would grant me a reward beyond measure. Perhaps it was his desperation in his voice or the solemnity of his plea. But I agreed. The arrangements were made, and we all settled. He expressed his gratitude in an unexpected manner. He did not offer payment in coin, but instead he took my blood. Not violently, as I might have feared, but with a needle, just enough to leave me lightheaded. He collected it in a coffee cup and then rolled back his own sleeve and withdrew an equal measure of his own blood. Mixing the two, he handed the cup to me, telling me that I should drink. I gave a wary chuckle, and I had informed him that I was flattered, but I had no desire to become a vampire, and he merely smiled, telling me that I would not become a vampire, that this would make me something more. I hesitated, but in the end, I reasoned that the worst that it could do was change me. And change me it did. After that night, I felt my tastes had shifted. I preferred my steak a shade redder than before. I never suffered so much as a cold or a cough. My body grew stronger. I could run farther, jump higher, and lift a bit more with ease. Words came to me fluently, as though persuasion had become a second nature. There seemed to be no curse in it, no aversion to sunlight, no fear of silver or holy ground. The vampire had spoken the truth. He told me that I should enjoy a long and fruitful life, and when I pass, my son shall inherit the same gift. It is a legacy, not a burden, a gift that shall endure. And so it has. And while I live, you and yours shall live as well. Frustrated, I read through it again, my eyes tracing the words like they might change if I looked hard enough. The more that I read, the more that my head throbbed, a dull ache curling at the base of my skull. And finally, I slammed the book shut. This wasn't the answer that I was looking for. Not really. If what I was reading was true, then whatever my great-great-grandfather Matthew had ingested had just woken something inside of him. It had made him into something. It twisted his blood and burned something ancient into his bones, I don't know. And yet none of that had passed down to the rest of us. My father, my siblings. We were all just healthy. Not unnaturally strong, not unusually fast, no supernatural gifts. Just a family line who rarely got sick, rarely saw a hospital bed. But Matthew had become something more. Something in that concoction had unlocked him, had pulled back the curtain on whatever lay dormant inside of him. And I couldn't shake the thought. What if it could be done again? What if it could be replicated? And I sat back, fingers drumming against the table. What was it about the blood that Matthew had taken? And more importantly, was I willing to do the same?
Puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
I jumped. Malcolm was standing in the doorway. a half-full bag of blood in his hand. The top of his lip had a red tint to it, and it took everything in me to not hurl on what was, probably, a very expensive book. I mean, a blood mustache. Gross.
Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I had a little nap and I figured I would come see how your revelation was going.
Honestly, I'm not really sure. It's all just really strange right now. And Malcolm sat down.
It always is. You look tired. Get some sleep. I believe I can manage myself for the time being.
I wanted to argue, but the yawn that exploded out of me kind of sealed that for me. I was exhausted. Which room would be the best for that? And Malcolm shrugged.
Mortician, I have 5 rooms in this rickety old crypt. Pick one and collapse.
And after searching for the least lived-in room, I finally settled on a floral print closet of a room that smelled like Old Spice and mothballs. It reminded me somehow of my dad, and that made it easy to pass out. When I heard the crash from downstairs, I was up like a shot. My phone told me that it had only been about 5 hours and that sunrise was still a couple of hours away. I ran downstairs thinking that Malcolm might have collapsed, but instead, I found Corey on the floor in the foyer. He looked paler than usual as Malcolm loomed over him, a fresh bag of party blood clutched in his hand.
Cornelius, what troubles you, boy? Look as if you've seen a ghost.
Corey had a hand on his chest like he thought that he might have a heart attack.
Well, Dad, it's a little weird to find someone who was in a coma when you left a few hours ago, suddenly up and about.
They didn't seem to have noticed me yet, and as Malcolm took a seat in his wing-backed chair, I hunkered down on the stairs and tried not to spoil their moment by making a Grandpa Joe reference.
Never fear, son, never fear. It would take more than a brute like that to stop Malcolm Hamilton von Trask. Why have you returned so soon and without a grandchild for me to fuss over? I heard you and your tasty paramour were in the underworld so she could whelp. She forgot her favorite lotion, and I agreed to hurry back and get it. How long have you been awake? A few hours. The mortician was reading, and his pronunciations were enough to shake the crypts. Besides, it's high time I got back to running my businesses. But you seem to have done such an adequate job of minding in my absence.
Corey looked a little taken aback.
Wow, Dad, that was almost a compliment. You must have slept well. I see you found your sense of humor while I was asleep. Can't wait to see what you've been working on. The mortician says it's quite impressive. Dad,
Corey said, gulping as he tried to power through.
Right now, you just need to worry about getting better. There'll be time for all that later.
I couldn't see Malcolm's face from here, but Corey looked a little nervous.
I may be centuries old, Cornelius. That does not mean I'm ready to retire to my chambers like some husk of a vampire. I have many things I wish to accomplish, including the bedding of that lovely Miss Robinson. Ha ha! Don't think I forgot her in my state of long rest. Oh, come on, Dad. I've got things under control. You don't have to. You most certainly do not. You have, in my absence, gained the attention of the Martial. The Martial, Cornelius. The last thing this business needs is his ilk scuttling around. That was weeks ago. I haven't seen hide or hair of him since then. He found what he was looking for, and he moved on. I have business holdings, Cornelius, that I do not wish my fellow vampires to know about. Things that would be better kept in the shadow.
I heard a soft slurping noise and realized that He was taking a drink.
Do not overtax me.
He said, his hand coming up as if to shoo a fly away.
Get what you came for and get back to your duties, son. Your attention is better spent on your wife and child now. Family is important, my boy. It's the most important thing a man can have in this world.
He sounded wistful, and Corey told him that he would be back in a few days before leaving out the front door. I crept quietly back downstairs and was careful not to make any noise as I climbed back into bed. It appeared that things were returning to normal around here. For better. Or worse. The conference room was silent, the air thick with unease. A long mahogany table stretched to the length of a dimly lit chamber, lined with high-ranking officials from various government agencies. A single man stood at the head of the room, adjusting his glasses as he glanced down at the classified dossier in his hands. The nameplate on the front of him read, Dr. Richard Levine, Head of Paranormal Biology Division. Clearing his throat, he began. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that we have received confirmation of an unprecedented and highly volatile preternatural birth. As of 0600 hours this morning, our operatives in the Ohio Valley region have reported that a succubus, designated entry S0984, is nearing the end of her gestation period. Within the next 72 hours, she will give birth to an entity that we have never before encountered. A vampire incubus hybrid. This is not theoretical. It is happening. And we must react accordingly. A murmur rippled through the room, but no one spoke. The overhead projector flickered to life, displaying a grainy surveillance image of a woman with deep red hair and unnatural beauty. Her distended stomach betraying the monstrous nature of what she carried. Levine inhaled sharply before continuing. The fusion of a succubus and a vampire was once deemed biologically improbable due to the conflicting nature of their reproductive mechanisms. Succubi are parasitic procreators, incapable of carrying a child in the traditional sense. Instead, they siphon life essence from a host and use it to construct a corporeal form for their offspring. Vampires, by contrast, are biologically sterile. Their undead nature negates traditional reproduction. However, recent studies and field data suggest that the introduction of a vampiric ichor during the critical phase of succubus conception alters this process, creating a viable hybrid. The result is an entity possessing both the adaptive predatory instincts of a vampire and the parasitic reproductive drive of an incubus. Levine turned a page in the dossier, revealing an anatomical sketch of what they estimated the newborn might resemble. The hybrid's cardiovascular system is expected to be dormant, similar to that of a vampire. However, its metabolic functions will likely align with that of an incubus, meaning that it will not merely consume blood, but life energy itself. Unlike traditional vampires that can store vitae, this creature will require prolonged contact with a victim to drain their essence over time. Its organs will be stored for maximum energy extraction. An enhanced esophageal tract lined with microcapillary siphons, a second nervous system specialized for emphatic manipulation, as well as an adrenal system that functions as both stimulant and regenerative cores. The creature's skeletal structure will be an amalgamation of two species. Vampiric bone composition tends to be denser, more resilient to trauma, whereas succubi retain a more fluid form, allowing for rapid transformations. The hybrid will likely possess reinforced skeletal density while maintaining the malleability of an incubus, potentially allowing for limited shape-shifting or morphic adaptation. The biggest concern, however, is its feeding compulsion. Succubi rely on seduction-based feeding, where the victim willingly surrenders their energy. A vampire's compulsion operates through more forceful means. This hybrid may combine both, meaning that it could enthrall a target to such a degree that they are not just unable to resist, but actively desire their own destruction. A grim silence in the air as Levine let the implications sink in. The screen changed, this time showing a map of the hellish region in which they believed that the succubi was residing. Now, let's discuss its potential capabilities. If our calculations are correct, the hybrid will inherit nocturnal superiority, rapid cellular regeneration, and the ability to cloud human perception. However, unlike traditional vampires, it will not be bound by the threshold invitation rule. The succubus lineage nullifies that barrier, meaning that it could infiltrate homes and secure locations with ease. We must also consider the unique evolutionary advantage such as an entity might possess. A vampire's primary limitations is its reliance on blood, but with the incubus energy extraction mechanism at play, this hybrid could sustain itself indefinitely without needing direct physical consumption. Its nervous system may be adapted for pheromonal influence beyond anything that we've previously observed, meaning entire populations could be compromised by its presence alone. Worse still, we estimate an accelerated maturation rate. Most succubus offspring, when given enough life energy, reach adulthood in a matter of months. If that remains true for this hybrid, we may be facing an adult-level apex predator before the year is out. A member of the Joint Task Force raised a hand. Dr. Levine, what is the proposed course of action? And Levine set the dossier down and exhaled. Our priority is containment. The mother must be incapacitated and the offspring must be captured for study. We will not take any action that violates the standing agreements between their realm and ours unless absolutely necessary. However, if capture proves impossible and containment fails, termination of both will be the only course of action. If this entity reaches full maturation outside of controlled conditions, standard paranormal response protocols will be insufficient. Failure to contain it does not just mean a new threat. It means the possible onset of an interdimensional conflict. We will not only be facing a new species, we will also be facing a war.